Well, thank you for joining everybody. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties we could have with the platform today, getting it started. But these virtual meetings, there's always something, there's always a hiccup, and you just got to plan for that. So I think this is the first time that DSITE and TSITE have ever co-hosted a meeting together. So I'm very excited to break new ground. And normally meeting in person would be a little difficult for us to co-host just because we're so far apart. For the DSITE members in the audience, I wanted to give a little background on the Tennessee section of ITE. We currently have around 300 members, and we average about 100 members per section meeting or attendance-wise. We've got 4 section meetings a year, and they rotate when we're meeting in person, which we haven't been for a while, but when we do meet in person, they rotate between Nashville, Memphis, and Chattanooga. And our summer meeting is always in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We currently have 5 student chapters: Tennessee Tech, University of Memphis, University of Tennessee, Vanderbilt University, and Tennessee State University. And we're working on adding a 6th student chapter with UT Chattanooga. So I want to thank everybody that joined today, and thank you for all our wonderful presenters. I'll be moderating the morning session, and Jessica will be moderating the afternoon session. So I guess now I'll turn it over to Jessica to talk about any DSITE opening remarks.
Thank you, Luke. We're so happy to partner with y'all. This has been a great opportunity. You know, COVID, can we still say we're in COVID? I don't know. My kid just got quarantined about a week ago, so I guess we can. Hopefully we're on the tail end of it though. One thing that I think has been a great takeaway is to be able to do partnerships like this that may be challenging in other circumstances. So it's great to get to partner with other chapters, and we're very excited about partnering with TSITE. I love the updates on y'all's chapter. I'm not sure that I'm as prepared as you, Luke, but just a background on DSITE. So DSITE has both Mississippi and Louisiana together as one chapter. We typically have 3 meetings a year. We have a winter meeting, a summer meeting, and then a fall meeting. They're usually 1 to 2 day meetings if we were meeting in person, and we go between Louisiana and Mississippi, so we rotate between the 2. We typically don't have set cities that we meet in. We just pick a city that I feel like everyone might want to go to, and that's where we have our meetings. And then our summer meeting, in the past, we will partner with Alabama ITE. We'll have that on the Gulf Coast. So those are always good meetings, and I'm ready to meet again in person. It'll be good, but hopefully we can continue these virtual meetings and partnering with other ITE sections. So I think that's my only announcements. Oh, I don't know, Luke and I worked together to put on a PowerPoint, but I think we may have to make a couple changes to it before for the lunch or before the next session. But just as a FYI for DSITE members, and Tennessee members, if you want to come and join our DSITE meetings, we have a meeting tentatively scheduled in August 4th to 6th in Gulf Shores, where we'll be partnering with Alabama ITE, and then we are still planning the fall meeting, which will be in Louisiana. So.
Is your summer meeting going to be in person, or are y'all still up in the air right now about that?
I think we're going to try to get it in person. So hopefully we'll see. If we, I think there's kind of a push to do a dual option of being in person and virtual. So that'll be one of those technical things we get to try to rummage through and see how that works out.
Yep, I think we're going to try the hybrid format, or we're going to consider that as well. It's a whole nother, adds another complexity, another layer to meetings, planning them, and also pulling them off to make it work for people online plus people in the room.
Yeah. Yes. But that's the plan.
Yep. Cool. Yeah, I think that's our plan too in Gatlinburg, is try to meet in person. It's been a while, so we're looking forward to it.
But thank you so much. I really have enjoyed working with you, Luke, and putting this together, and it's been great. So
It's been great work with you all as well. So
I think Prashant's on here. He is actually our president. So I was going to see if he had any additional announcements he wanted to.
okay.
Sorry, I'm just outside my office, just walking into my office. But thank you, Luke, for everything, setting us up. And I know last time we tried to work out in January, it didn't work out, but I really appreciate everything. And Jessica for taking a lead from Deep South for getting this thing done. As we said, like we are looking forward for our next meetings, in-person meetings too. And I think this virtual meeting gave us an opportunity so that we can do hybrid, and that will give a lot more people participation too. That's one thing we always see is like getting everybody going in person. So, but if this hybrid is coming in, I can see a lot more people attending meetings also. So, really excited. So, thanks for everything, guys. Again, enjoy the meeting.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see here. So I know virtual meetings are tough. I'm gonna try to make it a little more fun, make it interactive. So I've got some of y'all probably seen this before. It's Mentimeter. It's an interactive platform we use to kind of survey the audience, let y'all interact and give us responses. So if you want to pull out your smartphone or go to your web browser and type in menti.com, go to 75672487, type in that code and you can play along at home. And that code will be on top of the meeting slides as well if you missed it. It's like DSITE's winning so far. We got a guest. All right. I said if you missed that, it's the info is right here again. Looks like TSITE's still winning, or TSITE's still winning as far as attendance wise. So.
We're getting up there.
Yeah.
Slowly.
Well, I'll throw the question up again and it's after lunch and see what kind of results we get then too. So here's some trivia for you. How many states are in the Southern District of ITE? Nine's the correct answer. Most y'all got it. So this is a fun word cloud. So this is the last one, and we'll start our presentations. It's kind of an icebreaker, but where are y'all going for summer vacation? And the word will get bigger as more people use that word. So if everybody's going to Florida, it'll get bigger and bigger, or the beach, or
I love that there's someone going to Greece and then there's someone sleeping in. Both I'm envious of, so.
a lot for Florida, a lot for the beach, which I expected that.
It'd be cool if you could see it like on a map.
Well, they actually have an option where you can put like a map, and people can pick, like, ask, you know, where you're from.
That's
Yeah,
cool.
where you're going. I thought about doing that, but next time.
Always have like aspirations.
Yep. Cool. It looks like most people are going to either Florida or the beach or staying home. So Orange Beach, Hawaii, Michigan. Good comments.
Someone said, I like all the Gatlinburg trips. And then another person said, I see someone is going to Granger County, not sure what they're doing.
Well, that's fun. So with that, I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker. Let me pull up their presentation. Let's see. So our first presentation today will be co-hosted by Adam Moser with the City of Franklin and Beth Ostrowski with KCI. The title of their presentation is Studying the Effects of Future Development Potential in the Cool Springs area of Tennessee. I'll introduce Beth first and then Adam. So Beth has 13 years of experience in traffic engineering operations and planning. She's adept in traffic calming concepts and design, ITS design, coordinated signal systems, timing, and transportation planning. She has extensive experience managing a variety of traffic analysis and operations projects for KCI's Nashville office, including mid to large scale studies for municipalities and private development traffic impact studies. Beth is passionate about this work. She loves solving problems and doesn't back down in the face of a challenge. She prides herself in the ability to see each project from multiple angles and works to find solutions that meet the client's intent while creating the best solutions for all modes of road users, sorry. Adam has worked his entire career, 20-year career in traffic engineering and intelligent transportation systems in the public and private sectors, mostly in the Southeast. He has worked on several advanced signal and ITS projects in the areas of system engineering, design, construction, and integration of devices and software. Over the years, he has specialized in adaptive signal control technologies, including the integration, operation, and maintenance of these systems. Adam joined the City of Franklin in 2019 as a city traffic engineer, where he continues to practice, learn, and implement the many intricacies of the traffic engineering field. Please help me welcome Adam as they present Studying the Effects of Future Development potential in the Cool Springs area of Franklin, Tennessee.
Thanks, Luke. I'm going to have you run the presentation, I guess. We do have some questions in there, and yes, I was happy to see at least one more person going to Michigan than myself, at least. It looks a little bit bigger than some of the other answers. And I got to ask, I mean, I lived in Florida 8.5 years, and when you go there in the summer, it is hot. And unless you're just going to stay in the pool or in the ocean the whole time, man, it's just, that's a rough place to go in the summer. But can totally understand with the kids and whatnot. But I try to go north when it gets hot. At any rate, well, thanks y'all, and if you go to the next slide, jump right in. So a little bit about Franklin for maybe some of the DSITE people that are on that maybe have never visited us. We are the 10th oldest city in Tennessee. We're actually older than Nashville, and even though people think we're a suburb of Nashville, and we like to kind of think it's the other way around because we were here before they were. So, but no, we like to keep our small size. It's actually a constant citizen resident request. You know, we're growing too fast, we're doing this, that. So our board does hear that quite a bit. But at any rate, as you can see, our population has kind of exploded in the last 10 years. Lots of new retail office space, jobs have increased, obviously, with all the new development that we have. And in particular, the Cool Springs area, for which this study is about, that's kind of our main, business or commerce area that most of the people are working at or going to, at least in Franklin. So next slide. That on Google Earth is the Cool Springs area. It's up kind of the upper part of the screen there. It's bordered to the south by Murfreesboro Road, and sometimes people say Liberty Pike. And it goes all the way north into Brentwood at Moore's Lane. But you can see kind of all the larger white buildings there with the white rooftops. That's kind of our area that we're going to be talking about today, the Cool Springs area. So why did we do this study? When I came on in 2019, I was actually, when you start a new job and they hand you manuals and planning documents and all kinds of neat little documents. Here, read this. I'm not going to read a 1,000-page zoning ordinance, but you kind of flip through things and look at things. And so one of the things I started noticing was we've approved a lot of development, especially in the Cool Springs area. We do have another area that we approved a lot of development that's growing rapidly, but the Cool Springs area in particular, our planning documents did not expect that. So when you have a zoning ordinance, and everyone on here that has done traffic work knows this, you have a zoning ordinance that says you can do this, but all your planning documents say, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And maybe that won't happen for years and years and years. And they probably won't build 12 stories and yada, yada. Well, they submitted and they got it approved. So our trip generation was surprisingly 246% higher than our growth plan in that particular area. So that raised a red flag and said, oops, we probably should go look at the area and see what we need to do to maybe, if you approve development, you can't really go back and tell them no. So now we have to bring our infrastructure up to serve that development. So next slide. So this is the Cool Springs area, and this is all the approved development that I was just talking about. So as you can see, if you look at the ITE land use codes and the daily traffic, that's all of the different developments in the upper right there. They're represented kind of by the pink areas. All of that has been approved. And while not all of it is built, we do have a little bit of that portion built right now. Ovation has a very small portion built, office building. 1211, you know, the McEwen Town Center has a little bit built. And they continue to grow, but and as well as Wellington Medical Center, they've almost built out to what they have projected. But as you can see, that's a lot of trips that we have not accounted for necessarily in our transportation planning. So it's a lot of interesting, you know, we're doubling our office. You know, if you looked at the first slide, it was 5.1 million, and we have almost 5.9, almost 6 million. We're doubling the office space. Well, you know, who knows if that's going to happen, but I'm sure we'll get some resubmittals and some redos. Our retail, you know, we're adding 1.5 million square feet of retail. Just lots of building going on. Lots of our hotel rooms. We're supposed to almost double that. So as you can see, that's just the approved development in general. So that's the reason why we decided, hey, let's go ahead and study this. Let's see what we need to do. Maybe there's some policy decisions. Maybe there's some infrastructure decisions to be made, and whatnot. So the next slide, I'm going to hand this off to Beth, and she's going to talk about the meat of the study and what they did, and I guess just go for it, Beth, and let us and I'll come back in the end and give you a wrap up of what the board said and what we've implemented and what we're going to implement. So go ahead, Beth.
Of course. Thanks, Adam. So we jumped into this study tasked with inventorying and analyzing existing conditions, evaluating the impacts to the transportation network based on multiple future scenarios, and recommending improvements to operations, infrastructure, and policy. The study area, Adam's kind of gone over this, but with 64 intersections, I kind of like this graphic that just identifies our major roadways pretty clearly. Next slide, please. So we began with data collection in January of 2020. Luckily, we had everything done before COVID hit, so we lucked up there. One highlight related to data collection was the drone footage, which we used to validate our peak hour observations and model. With the quantity of intersections and really this being a very large study area, the drone footage proved very valuable as we refined our existing model. And these are all stills from that drone footage. Next slide, please. So we had recommended to the city using PTV Vistro instead of Synchro, which I think is what most people might expect. And before I jump into the why, let's use Menti to conduct another quick survey. Luke, I think if you go to the next slide and pull up that Menti question. So are you familiar with PTV Vistro? Do you use it? Choices: yes, often, yes, occasionally, heard of it but haven't used it, and not familiar. And I'm gonna go ahead and answer as well. We'll give it just a second, but good information on what I need to tell y'all on this next slide. Luke, I think that's probably a good subset there. So PTV Vistro does look a lot like Synchro. It feels a lot like Synchro, particularly the new latest iterations of Synchro, where you can have multiple scenarios in one file and where you can do your distribution via paths. In my opinion, it's a superior product to Synchro for this particular type of study, and I'll give you just a couple identifiers there. One, in terms of the quantifiable results, we much prefer the HCM6 analysis in PTV Vistro over Synchro. In Synchro, it feels like you make any little tweak to typical NEMA phasing, and it automatically just does not let you run in HCM6. I know there's some workarounds, but of course it just feels like a buggy thing in Synchro, in my opinion. The files can be compatible back and forth with Synchro, so that just gives us comfort that we're not creating something that's just going to sit and not be used. There are some caveats to that. Of course, when you're putting in distribution via paths, it doesn't convert those directly to Synchro. So that's something to keep in mind. And our model, we're actually working with PTV right now because our model is a certain degree of complicated that we're actually having some troubles converting back and forth. But as always, just check your parameters and check your settings when you convert files back and forth. In terms of flexibility, I said that, Synchro now, you can do some paths, do some scenario testing. The difference with Vistro is that you can have multiple scenarios with varying geometry and varying signal operations in one file. And that we love that, especially when you spend the time to draw these distribution paths, which can be a little time intensive. Having the ability to change some geometry and not have it be in a different file is huge. We also really prefer the internal program QC. So Synchro will tell you that something is off and it will try to point you in the right direction. Vistro will basically direct you exactly to where it thinks the problem is, and it's much clearer. So I don't use PTV Vistro exclusively. My team doesn't use it exclusively, but we do really like it. And there are great, there's the right study to use it. And once you know it, I think that it's cost comparable in terms of the amount of time it takes. So we've gotten our whole model set up. Let's jump into our existing analysis results just to kind of show you some of these pictures. So this is the only time you'll see these results via a map, but you'll see here AM results, nothing too crazy, a couple intersections failing, but certainly nothing scary here. Midday looks much the same. We can go to the next one. Click through these pretty fast. Midday looks much the same. And PM also a little worse, but generally quite similar. If you know Cool Springs, if you're familiar how well some of these intersections operate might surprise you. It's usually where two arterials are crossing that we're having issues under existing analysis. So we took our existing analysis and we jumped into the future. Next slide, please. We looked at two categories of future scenarios. The first category was approved development, which we considered at 50% and 100% build out. And then we had maximized development scenarios. Ultimately, we analyzed these 3 times at 25%, 50%, and 100%. More on that and the maximized development just in a little bit here. Next slide. So we began with background growth, which we considered by corridor, not system-wide. Growth rates, just for information, landed between 1% and 2% for all corridors, so 1, 1.5, or 2%. We used 3 different methods to validate our background growth. First, we compared historic turning movement count data. The city had an abundant collection of historic turning movement counts that we could analyze and look at year-over-year growth. Second, we pulled TDOT's ADT tube data and did that comparison that I think every traffic engineer across the state of Tennessee uses. And third, we used StreetLight to pull historic volumes via mobile device tracking. I probably should have had another Menti question about StreetLight, but if we have questions about that in Q&A, I can answer those. I'm sure StreetLight has pitched to most people on this call at this point. We also use StreetLight to determine distribution for regions that we created across the study area. These regions and distribution were used to extend approved traffic impact study distributions outside their individual study areas. And we also used this, what I'll call macro distribution, in the maximized development scenario, which I'll describe shortly. Next slide. So Adam touched on this a bit earlier, but we had 16 approved developments and their associated recommendations added to our model. As I mentioned, we modeled each of these developments in Vistro and extended the distribution paths beyond their own study limits to our study limits. So let's look at the results for the approved developments. Next slide. At 50% of build of the 16 approved developments, and these are grown to 2030, operations generally still look pretty acceptable. 31% of intersections are anticipated to operate at unacceptable levels of service, according to City of Franklin standards in the PM peak. This is an opportunity to explain why I am an advocate for this type of study. When conducting a basic traffic impact study, we may include a few background developments, particularly ones that are really, right in the project vicinity. But there are likely, especially in a high growth area, other future developments outside the immediate project vicinity. I believe the best way to track these developments and the actual needs of the transportation network is via what I describe as a living model. So I'll step off my soapbox for a second here on this one, but you'll see on the next slide kind of the importance of understanding the bigger picture. You can go to that next slide. Oh, we're there. Thank you. So things get quite a bit worse when you look at 100% build. Remember, all these developments are already entitled, and we have more than half of the intersections failing, either with level of service E or level of service F in the PM peak hour. And I promise you, none of the 16 traffic impact studies that we took and incorporated into this model indicated that this level of service or capacity failure. Next slide. So then, we already know things are starting to look bad, and we decided to make things interesting. So for our second category of scenarios, we determined the maximum allowable development based on a few things: available acreage, zoning policy, and land use policy. This was a decently lengthy process, but we first determined available acreage by looking at a few factors. So vacant parcels, there aren't very many of those in Cool Springs, but we did consider those. Parcels where the land value exceeds the building value. And then parcels with a small building and a large amount of open space land that could be surface parking lot. So in that, we excluded a few things. We excluded lots with known development issues, like a steep slope, for example. And we also included land uses like a car lot that might have that small building and large surface parking, but isn't necessarily an underutilized development. In total, we found 695 acres available for development or redevelopment. And you can see on the bottom right, a lot of trips, 162,000 PM peak hour trips is what we were looking at. Next slide. So we wanted to anonymize this data rather than call out specific parcels. We didn't want a report that said, hey, everybody go buy this land. So we utilized the regions that I discussed earlier, and this allowed us also to distribute trips from each of these regions throughout the network. We looked at zoning and land use policy to determine, for example, an allowable building height within each region, and anticipated uses per the land use policy for each region. This allowed us to complete a trip generation and eventually assign trips to each of these regions. So let's click ahead to the results here, Luke. At 25% of the maximized development scenario, we are failing in most places during all times a day. And I think it's worth noting here that we haven't incorporated any improvements yet. So this is just with the existing road network and already programmed infrastructure improvements. And then the next one, 50% looks probably just like everyone predicted based on the numbers we had looked at. And let's click ahead to the next one. So at 100%, I described our model as broken. Do not get me wrong here, PTV Vistro worked. but the delays and the queues were so monstrous that the results were really laughable and not worth reporting. We actually went back and added the 25% scenario after the fact when we realized this 100% scenario looked so similar to the 50%, just a worse version of it, because we wanted to have two scenarios that produced varying results that were worth reporting. Next slide. So the question is, where do we go from here? I will start by saying our presentation pivots now. Well, KCI did produce a detailed list of short, medium, and long-term infrastructure recommendations and associated figures or graphics to go with that to mitigate traffic in scenario 2. We ultimately realized that infrastructure could not be at the heart of this study. Instead, we focused our attention on policy recommendations. Policy recommendations had always been a part of our scope, but shifted right to the center once we saw our future scenario results. All right, next slide. So we began by looking at existing policy documents. Franklin has quite a few of them. Adam kind of touched on this earlier. We can skip right ahead. Next slide. And we determined 3 focus areas for our policy recommendations. These included approval of incoming developments, how you can reduce single occupancy vehicle or SOV trips, and continuing to provide multimodal alternatives. In the following slides, we've highlighted the city's current practice in these areas, issues with those practices if they exist, and then our recommendations coupled with some examples. We partnered with the city really closely to develop these recommendations and made a lot of refinements just to make sure that we were proposing something the city was comfortable with and really could move forward. Next slide, please. So jumping right into development approval practices, the city currently assesses the impact of developments using intersection level of service, and those impacts must be mitigated when level of service D is not maintained. However, we know there are many locations where level of service D is already unachievable. The photo at the bottom of this slide is one example where this occurs at the intersection of Cool Springs Boulevard and Mallory Lane. Next slide. When we look at this intersection, and this is Vistro here, we see that it would take 11 extra lanes identified in red on the right to get this intersection to a level of service D. These improvements are likely physically and fiscally infeasible. So what's the answer? Next slide. Actually, let me say one more thing on that previous slide. That was if you look at this comparison, and just because I know I basically I'm not giving you any infrastructure recommendations. This is what a lot of the intersections look like. Basically any point where a couple arterials were crossing, this or more is the level of improvement needed. So this isn't like a one-off situation here. Every intersection basically needed at least a lane or two, and many needed 5 or 10 or more additional lanes in order to get to level service D. All right, you can skip ahead. Thanks, Luke. So we proposed that a target level of service still be maintained in the city's street standards, and knowing that level service D isn't always achievable, and simply mitigating impacts with traditional infrastructure improvements as best as you can. So the city is already moving forward with this recommendation, moving instead to level service E as a threshold, which I think is a great first step. In addition, we recommended the city begin using alternative metrics such as VMT, vehicle miles traveled, to look at impacts and applicable solutions more broadly. So let's look at an example of that really quickly. Next slide. So let's say, for instance, the city has a new large mixed-use development coming to Cool Springs. It'd be a great addition to the local economy, but all of the surrounding intersections are failing with existing level of service. We know the development will increase the number of vehicles on the road and make level of service, delay, queues worse, but there's no feasible infrastructure improvement or improvements that would fix it. We can't pave our way out of the problem. So the question in this situation becomes, how do we make sure that the impacts are mitigated as much as possible? In situations like this, we advocated that the city look at the vehicles miles traveled of the development, or VMT, which takes into account the surrounding land use, multimodal facilities, and trip characteristics. Typically, we think about how many trips are generated by a development, but what if we knew that this site would have a regional employment draw, for instance, necessitating long commute lengths from common destinations? It may change our feelings a little bit. So armed with that knowledge, the city could look at alternative ways to mitigate impacts, not by adding more capacity, but by working with the developers or tenants to establish methods. And I'll get into some more options later, but one example would be a carpool or van pool program, which wouldn't necessarily have been a first mitigation strategy using other options. If we were just looking at simply how many cars we were adding to the road. So I think this is a good place to pause and go to Menti again. And the question is, what is your experience with VMT analysis and implementation? Choices are in discussions to implement VMT for traffic impact studies, familiar or following VMT analysis for traffic impact studies, or not familiar with VMT analysis. Thanks, Luke.
Bueller.
Yeah, is it working?
We did. Hopefully you didn't put everybody to sleep there, Beth. Gosh.
Is it still on the slide, Luke? Or is that? Ah, there we go.
Awesome.
Sorry, I had to refresh it. People were voting, but it wasn't showing for some reason.
I was gonna say I voted.
It's there.
So VMT, I don't have another slide on VMT, but it is something being used in a handful of states or starting to be used in a handful of states, specifically in California. If you've seen anything, most of the articles and studies being published are coming out of California. Our recommendation is definitely not to get rid of level of service and delay as a metric, but instead to add VMT as an option. And we can talk more about it at the end if we want. Certainly, I'm happy to answer more questions. Let's jump to the next slide. So the VMT discussion is a great segue into trip reduction strategies. Currently, Franklin zoning code encourages mixed-use development and allows for shared parking arrangements where appropriate. Our goal is to encourage more use of these strategies in order to maintain the city's quality of life. With more development coming, the city needs other tools to reduce the number of vehicles on roadways so that the quality of life can be preserved as much as possible. Next slide. So we recommended that the city develop a toolbox of travel demand management strategies, or TDM strategies. These strategies are intended to change how or when people make trips using both programs and infrastructure investments. We recommended these strategies be tailored to Franklin, its residents, employees, visitors, and incoming developments so they can be most effective within the city. Next slide. A few examples that we recommended are highlighted here. I'm personally a fan, just to point out a few, of shared fleet vehicles, whether in an office environment or in a residential development, like a multifamily housing development. Multimodal improvements, of course, and priced parking strategies. I think those are all very effective opportunities. Next slide. And last but not least, we turn to the provision of multimodal options. Kind of all of it ties together, if you've noticed, knowing that if we want to get people out of their cars, we need to provide alternatives. This area is twofold, related both to what infrastructure is provided and financially how it's paid for. The issue at hand is that there are other micromobility options that could be effective at reducing vehicular trips, but they aren't currently allowed in the city. In addition, there is no dedicated funding source for multimodal improvements like there is for roadway improvements. Next slide. We recommended a few things in this area. First, there is a real potential for micromobility options to be successful in Cool Springs and fill a niche mobility need. We recommended the city use a pilot project to test this. I think Adam will talk in just a minute about the board's temperature on that, but it was one of our recommendations. Further, we recommended the city reevaluate its roadway cross section to ensure it can safely and efficiently accommodate various forms of travel. And last but not least, we recommended that the city explore the need for additional multimodal fees. Next slide. Ultimately, our recommendations included an implementation timeframe for policy recommendations, which included tandem infrastructure recommendations. We viewed these recommendations as a buffet. While we hope the city will take everything from the buffet and implement many of them, we recognize there may be a few things that aren't their option of choice, and that they don't need every strategy or everything on the buffet to be successful, but they do need to take some things, I think, off the buffet in order to move the city into the future successfully. With that, Adam, I'll turn it back to you to bring it home.
Yes, so as you can imagine, study lasted, well, pretty much through COVID. I think we, like Beth said, we started before COVID and started presenting, had 4 presentations to the board all the way from, I guess it was March, April to November of 2020. Kind of going through what Beth just did step by step. But in the end, as you can see our comments here, when you're not in front of the board, sometimes they're, the remote meetings, Zoom meetings, sometimes you don't get quite as much feedback. So that may have helped in that or hindered some of our progress. But at any rate, we did get these comments. The general consensus was, yes, we probably need to look at our policies, revise some of our policies. Our mayor is very big into expanding our transit. Right now, they are very small commuter type buses, or the shuttles, if you will, that we use. We don't have large buses in Franklin. And we do have travel on demand, so you can call our transit to Todd and get picked up for the last mile stuff. So we're looking at that, and they do know there has been some studies on transit for a Cool Springs circulator. However, it needs a lot of work. The study, 15-minute headways wouldn't, to me, that's not a circulator. Could you imagine trying to go from office to lunch and having to wait 15 minutes on each end? You might as well just go to McDonald's then or something. But so that needs some work. The level of service, I think the board was very agreeable that they kind of understood that the way the old level of service worked, as we used it for the last, 40, 50 years, build a lane and magically it gets better, or lengthen a turn bay and put a turn bay here. Well, that's not what draws people to Franklin, unfortunately. They don't want to see concrete and lanes and ugliness. That's not one of the reasons why we're a city that people want to move to. So that they understood the VMT argument, moving the level of service, at least having a target, and opening up these recommendations for policy changes. The biggest thing, well, there's 2 biggest things. Let me hit micromobility first. We did vote, our board voted down a pilot a few years back, not quite a few years back. So a micromobility pilot would really need to be accompanied by a study, a pretty extensive study for how we would implement something like that, where it would be implemented for a pilot. And then, a Cool Springs area, we have a lot of sidewalk, but it's not necessarily ridership type sidewalk for an e-bike or a scooter. It's more of a recreational walking type facility. So we'd look at cross sections, things like that. So they're not necessarily against micromobility, but I think it just needs a little bit more study to try to kick that off. And obviously, everyone's probably sitting here going, well, all that office space, that's not going to be there anymore. And they brought that. Our board's like, well, how's remote working going to change? Hopefully, as we've seen, and I keep reminding people every time they complain about traffic and signals in the last month or two, is look, traffic's back in Tennessee, and maybe the AM peak is different. That seems to be across the board. But when you go into your midday and afternoon and PM peak, they're pretty much almost there. So that we're pretty much there, except for the AM peak is a little different. But so that's we'll see how that goes. I think our development's probably going to change. They might resubmit and redevelop their plans and whatnot. Maybe a little less on the office space, but we'll have to take a look. Next slide. So what have we taken out of this study, and how are we going to use it in the future? So what we've already implemented in our new street standards for the city of Franklin is we did change some level of service criteria. So the level of service D, the overall intersection, we're still leaving that in there, but we're allowing for movements to be level of service E. We still have to maintain a level of service. So for instance, if we have an E or maybe even an F in the peak, which we do have a few, the developer needs to at least keep those existing levels of service. So we're not holding their feet to the fire to bring it up necessarily if they can't, but they have to keep the existing, including infrastructure improvements, et cetera. Now, if we can't meet these level of service criteria, because we didn't implement BMT measures just yet, we're kind of saying, well, if you can't meet it, here are your options. And this is in the street standards. You can reduce your density. You can look at alternate intersection design. As Beth mentioned, TDM, if they have some studies that are quantifiable and not just say, well, we think so many people are going to do this, but we're going to hold their feet to the fire. So if they're going to say, well, the people that live here are remote work, we're going to reduce trips this way, or we're going to commit to transit and whatnot, we're going to hold their feet to the fire on that. So needs to be quantifiable with existing studies and examples. And of course, our cross sections promote other modes. I just talked about that for like micromobility pilot. So future, we're going to revisit our transit study. Like I said, the Cool Springs circulator, we need some improvements on that. We need to figure out how to get people to go from office to grab a bus, go to a restaurant, go get a thing, maybe a shopping or a return or whatever, come back without using their car. The micromobility, such that what is needed, how are we going to expand our sidewalk, how do we reallocate our sidewalk infrastructure. VMT, again, Beth touched on it. Sometimes what we struggle with on the city level is you kind of have to look maybe just outside your city for trips and where they're coming from. While I think, for instance, California is statewide, regional. I think, and it's not like we can't do it as a city, but I think we need to involve our partners, our neighbors in the use of that. And then, of course, multimodal funding. Does development have a fee to support our transit or alternate modes of transportation? We're going to explore that in the future. So that's kind of the gist of what we're using the study for. And with that, I think we can probably go to questions.
Thanks, Adam. That's a great presentation. I know all the agents, a lot of cities now are struggling with massive influx of growth and how to plan for it. And like you said, models created just 5-10 years ago are already out of date. So I think a lot of agencies are struggling with that. For those in the audience, I guess if you want to type in your question and I'll read it out.
question. First of all, I love that y'all are using Vistro because that's something that we've definitely explored as an alternative. You know, I feel like we're so like used to seeing Synchro and so used to using Synchro, and we hear about Vistro, so it's really nice to like see it used. You know, a lot of times I feel like when we are analyzing these intersections, we automatically, and we do this here in Mississippi, but we automatically go to like how large can we make the intersection? You know, like how many lanes do we need? How many left turn lanes? You know, like just keep packing it on. Was there ever a consideration? I like the multimodal. I think that's really great. Was there ever a consideration though for alternative intersections, or was that something that was like explored?
Yes, so in our recommendations, we do have, we explored maybe at 8 to 12 of the intersections. We looked at alternative intersection designs. One important thing we talked about is a lot of the alternative intersection designs take up a little more space, right? And the city is not comfortable with, you know, somebody losing valuable parking or losing a building for an alternative intersection that may not. We all know how roundabouts go over, even though I think we love roundabouts, they don't always go over that well in the public. So I think that for something that might seem a little scary to the public, they didn't want to be moving the needle into people's properties. We do have some further consideration for alternative intersections in our infrastructure recommendations, though.
Yeah, the cost of right-of-way in Franklin is incredibly expensive. It's a very affluent community, and the cost of right-of-way is it's just not feasible. But we definitely would, if a developer came in and said, we're going to dedicate all this right away, we want to make a new alternate intersection to help traffic, by all means, we'd be very open to that. They don't like giving up their property, however, but we would definitely be open to it.
I actually had a question. Have you got any feedback from the development community? What do they think of these policy changes? Are they for it, against it?
They're for it. Definitely. Like, of course, anything that eases their responsibility to build lanes and dedicate right away and whatnot, they're going to be for. But I think at the same time, we always work with our development partners. That's one thing that when I came in here, I was very, cautious. And as I think my eyes kind of opened a little bit more and said, all right, let's work together. As long as we're working together and they're not using it to for lack of a better term, get one over on this. But I think they're all very much in favor. If you relax level of service criteria, they're going to be in favor. If they can come up with some way to reduce trips, they're going to be, and we're going to listen to them. They're definitely going to be in favor. So yeah, we've had a great partnership.
That's good to hear. On the PT Bistro, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I think there's some people put their questions in the chat too.
Yeah, I was going to give a few more minutes, but yeah, there's a few. I'll hit those too. I had a quick question about the PT Bistro. Is that more for planning, or can you use it for operations too, like signal timing? And what's the like? Is it compared to Sync or cost wise?
So it is very similar to Synchro. It's more of an operations effort, and they do have their own signal timing, kind of platform in there. We have not used it yet for signal timing. Good plans. The cost-wise, if you were using it for a basic traffic impact study, it's going to cost more to do PTV Bistro. Setting up the paths, and the first few times you use it, it's going to cost more, just like any new software. But setting up the paths can take longer. My group does use it for regular traffic impact studies when they're complicated, or when a developer, mixed use development, and they've changed the program 6 times. Those studies we've just learned, set it up in Vistro because it makes it so much easier. It's a world easier when you have the paths all set up, and basically you just have to pivot the trip generation, plug in the trip generation, and it does the work for you. Every now and then, you do have to consider those paths. Do they change? Does an office trip distribution is not going to necessarily look like a hotel trip distribution on the same block. But for the most part, once it's set up, it's so much friendlier to use. And for this type of study, it's worlds easier to use Vistro than Synchro.
So Luke, we did do a little bit of exploration on signal timing. My other engineer, David Chang, did a little, I guess, experiment with the signal timing between Synchro and PTV Vistro. And as you can imagine, they're going to come up with some different splits and results. But for the most part, they were pretty much in agreement with like cycle lengths and things like that. So I think you could probably use either or. I think we came up to the conclusion that it's okay for signal timing. It's probably, if you're an engineer and you use it, I would never use these things to actually implement. It gets you in the ballpark. Never use Synchro or Vistro and hand it to me and say, here you go, here's your signal timing, because they're models, right? I mean, come on, people don't drive like the models do. So we have to be very careful with those, but they're, for the most part, they give out the same results.
Yeah, let me add on that too. Franklin has a couple roundabouts, or a roundabout and some future roundabouts. We compared Synchro to Vistro to Sidra, and I think everybody knows Synchro and roundabout analysis is not always the best, but we were able to get Vistro to match Sidra very closely. So we felt pretty comfortable with that analysis.
That's good to hear. I'm glad Synchro has competition now. They've been the lone program for a while. They need competition. I'll get a few questions. Going from Cindy Pionki. She asked about drone footage. How often do you use this, or do you use this frequently now? What's the cost to use for the project? Did you do that yourself, or did you sub that out, the drone footage?
So we did that in-house. We have some licensed drone operators in-house. I would say we were out flying for, I believe, 2 days. And so it's just 2 days worth of a person's time is the cost. There isn't really additional cost beyond that. They're large files, of course, to download. We felt like it was a good thing to do in order to allow us to be in kind of multiple places at once. So that was how we talked to the city about it. Like, we want to be able to see, we had 2 cars out doing just field validations of what progression looked like and what, cues look like, so we can validate our model. But we still couldn't be everywhere. 64 intersections, pretty spread out. So that is the primary use for the drone footage. And we also felt like it could be used for videos to show things to the board, or if we had moved to a community meeting, it's just good to visually show people what it looks like. I don't know, Adam, if you see any use for that footage after the fact now, other than pretty pictures.
Yeah, our planning department loves it. They like to take stills of it and put it on their planning documents. But no, I would definitely recommend, if you have a corridor with multiple intersections that are causing you problems, it's great for queue analysis and cycle failures and things like that, to watch that happen. I mean, you can do it with cameras too, but as you know, our cameras are at one intersection here and another intersection down the road. And so when you can get that bird's eye view, that's for a problem area, it really helps. I wouldn't probably do it for like one single intersection and just go out there and do it yourself and watch it. But if you're looking at a corridor or an area, that it really helps.
I think we touched, Matt asked about alternative intersection design. I think we've already touched on that. He also had a comment. Says Vistra signal timing can be used to develop, analyze the green band coordination along a route instead of just a corridor. So you can span multiple routes over left turns along multiple corridors.
Yeah, Matt, thank you. I knew that, and because I just haven't used it, I forgot about that. So you can have it make a bend and go where the people go rather than just down one corridor.
And
That's
then
pretty
notice the only other question up there that I do want to touch on is the COVID-19. I think I touched on that. Our board keeps harping on how it changes traffic patterns. But if you're in Franklin, Tennessee, and you're a resident, you know that our traffic has come back to normal. And the only one that hasn't is our AM peak. And of course, a corridor that has a lot of office space on it might not be 100% back. However, word on the street is Nissan North America is coming back full strength. All of our healthcare companies that are on Carruthers Parkway are coming back full strength, especially come August, September, as kicking and screaming as their employees are that they don't want to and they want to work from home. It sounds like for a majority of them, and I'm not going to say that we're not going to have different traffic patterns or different counts, but for a majority of them, the CEOs want everybody back in the office. And that'll be interesting to see how it affects employment. If somebody can get a job working remotely elsewhere, if that provides a shift in our employment scheme. So stay tuned on that. But for the most part, we did get our counts pre-COVID, so that was important to know.
Yeah, and if our recommendations had said, in this exact scenario, you have to build these exact turn lanes, exactly this length to move towards success, I think that would be less useful because we don't all have, our crystal balls all look a little different in terms of what this is going to look like post-COVID. But Franklin is growing, Cool Springs is growing, and the recommendations that we've landed on and policy changes that we've landed on and recommended will help, regardless of exactly, where some counts are higher or lower in the next few years.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing any more questions, so I think we're good on time. So thank you, Adam and Beth, for presenting. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So with that, I'm gonna go to a quick 5-minute break and then we'll switch to the next presenter. Another fun icebreaker question. It looks like LSU and UTK are the big hitters today. Tennessee Tech's pretty close, and Memphis second.
Does the more people that answer that, does it get bigger?
Yeah. So LSU had the most because it's the biggest, but it's like it makes it fun. So I'll go ahead and introduce our second speaker while I'll let this run some more, give you all a chance to vote. So our second presentation today will be presented by Yap Tigard with Arcadis. The title of his presentation is Bringing the Turbo Roundabout to the US. Yap has over 13 years experience in Arcadis. He started his career in the Netherlands and moved to the Atlanta area in 2019. Since his transfer to the USA, Yap has promoted the Turbo Roundabout. He has presented at several conferences and webinars. He's used his experience with the Dutch turbo roundabouts to look for best practices and the best way to implement them in the USA. Currently, Yap is working with the Georgia DOT to update the roundabout design guide to add elements of the turbo roundabout to their multi-lane roundabout designs. Also, Georgia DOT has asked Yap to help review the first turbo roundabout design in the state. Please help me welcome Yap as he presents Bringing the Turbo Roundabout. I guess I'll stop sharing my screen, Yap.
Well, thank you, Luke. I hope everybody can hear me, and let me start sharing my screen. That will be this screen. I think you can see my screen now. Luke, can you confirm that?
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect. Well, thanks for the introduction. And yes, my name is Jaap Tigelaar, typical Dutch name, sometimes difficult to pronounce, but Luke, you did a nice try. I'd like to tell you guys something about the turbo roundabouts, a familiar design we use in the Netherlands, but still new for the US. For today, I'd like to discuss a little bit about the evolution of the roundabouts in general, then dig into the question why turbo roundabouts, a little bit about the history of the turbo roundabouts, and show you some of the design elements of the turbo roundabouts, and some special attentions to details and special users. We look into some traffic operations and comparisons, and then next step of bringing the turbo roundabout to the US, and just show you guys something we already learned in the last few years and how they might look like in the next years. First, quickly about the evolution of the US roundabouts. The roundabout evolution in the is it running? Yeah. In the US started with the single lane roundabouts, which were very successful. We know not everybody likes them, but after implementing, they're always successful. These are very nice to use in urban areas, rural areas, near schools, or wherever. Lots of communities have already embraced a single lane roundabout, and you can see them popping up everywhere. You can have them with bypasses or whatever. Once we got comfortable with the single lane roundabouts, we blew them up and did the multi-lane roundabouts, as you can see over here. These first started with multiple lanes on the main road and single lanes on the side roads. Then they grew into multi-lanes with all directions, 2x2s and 3x3s even sometimes. After we blew them up, we decided to shrink them as well. And now we have the comfort of the mini roundabouts, the smaller ones. This is much smaller than the single lane roundabouts with about 90 feet in diameter, while many are using this on low speed approaches. Several communities also starting to use them in success on higher speed approaches. But the question is, what is next? So we think that the turbo roundabout could be the new tool in the toolbox to use on multi-lane roundabouts. In this presentation, I will provide some background information and about history and look into how we can implement them into the US. A typical copy-paste from the Netherlands like these kind of images in the US might not be the best solution. So we need to adjust them a little bit. So why turbo roundabouts in general? An important question, because if we cannot answer this question, nobody will accept it. Well, in the Netherlands, we introduced the single lane roundabouts already in the 80s. So we already experienced 30 years of, or 40 years of single lane roundabouts. They were really successful, but when traffic volumes increased, and very similar to the US, in the early 90s, multi-lane roundabouts become popular in the Netherlands. By the time the 90s rolled around, we experienced some issues with conflicts at the roundabouts, as you can see over here. Lots of fender bender crashes due to lane changes within the roundabout, cutting conflicts and everything made them less safe as we expected to be. With these weaving conflicts, as you can see on this kind of images, when people from the inside lane cut over the outside lane for the exit, cutting off the cars on the outside lane. And this is also showed at this movie. Here's a good video from the city of Hilliard in Columbus, Ohio, that shows the potential problems with the 2x2 roundabouts. The green arrow driver on the left is approaching the double lane roundabout. And you can see that this is the first problem that sometimes happens. The red car failed to yield for both lanes in the roundabouts. And as you can see, the movie continues. Those two cars are side by side, creating a crash when the green car wants to exit the roundabout. And that's because the red car didn't. So he was on the outside lane, wanting to make a left turn, and he used the outside lane instead of the inside lane. So these are two mistakes often made on multi-lane roundabouts that a turbo roundabout can solve. So what kind of design challenges in the Netherlands we've experienced? Basically, the turbo, what we wanted to do is we wanted to design a layout that eliminates those safety conflicts as we saw on the movie before, and still increases the capacity. And this resulted in a spiral-shaped roundabout, turbo roundabout, without lane changing on the roundabout itself. So why the name turbo roundabout? Well, it is not because you can have high speeds on the roundabout, because we normally design them for speeds like 20 to 25 miles per hour, but it refers to the improved traffic flow compared to a standard multi-lane roundabout. So what is a turbo roundabout? How is different to the roundabout we design in the US normally over here? Well, there are four main concepts in the turbo roundabout. First, there are no lane changes within the turbo roundabout itself. This eliminates the conflicts we showed in the movie earlier. This is accomplished by a small raised curb between the lanes. I will show you some examples later in the presentation. With this curb in place, drivers are forced to make all lane choices upstream of the roundabout before entering the roundabout. Another very unique feature is the spiral geometry. Think of the turbo roundabout as two semicircles that are a little bit of an offset. This offset naturally spirals the inside lanes to the outside lanes of the roundabout. We come to that detail also a little bit later. Lastly, and unlike many roundabouts here in the US, in the Netherlands, we use radial approaches on the entry. That is the right angles instead of a tangential approach or a left offset. This is a very different philosophy, and we normally use in the Netherlands. And we will take about these details on the next slides. As they move, there it goes, yeah. A big answer on the question why turbo roundabout is the traffic safety. The safety benefit can be explained by the number of conflict points at the roundabout itself. A conventional 2-lane roundabout has 16 conflict points, as shown in the image. That is 12 actual conflict points, 2 weaving points, and 2 cutting points. The turbo roundabout only has 10 points. And now the weaving points and the cutting conflicts are not there anymore. So 16 versus 10, that is a reduction of 37.5%. That is the theoretical approach, but the safety benefits is also proven in an evaluation study done by a student at the Windesheim University in the Netherlands in 2016. Christian Vos looked at the crashes at intersection 3 years before and 3 years after that intersection was transformed to a turbo roundabout. This evaluation resulted. This evaluated location where a multi-lane roundabout was transformed. We looked at the injury crashes 3 years before and 3 years after. And you can see in the table that compared the unsignalized and the signalized intersections to the turbo, and it showed the similar advantage for a turbo roundabout compared to what you would expect for introducing a roundabout at unsignalized or signalized intersection. But we also looked at locations where we had a multi-lane roundabout and transformed it into a turbo roundabout. And what we saw was a reduction of 53% in crashes. And that is a big reduction in safety, in crashes, so improvement of safety. And interestingly, we also looked at the transformation of a single lane roundabout to a turbo roundabout, and we saw also a reduction. That's a little bit counterintuitive because normally when you introduce a multi-lane roundabout at a single lane roundabout location, you would think about a little bit of an increased number of crashes. But this is a reduction because we had normally a capacity issue at single lane locations. That's why we transformed them to multi-lane turbo roundabouts, and you could still see a reduction in crashes. That's the answer on why the turbo roundabout. A little bit about the history of the turbo roundabout. Well, it is invented by Bertus Fortuyn in 1996. Bertus is the guy on the image, on the picture on the right side. He came up with the idea after a large study. We met him in 2018, and at these moments I have still contact with him to discuss with him also the developments we made in the US. The graph on the left side of the slide shows the number of turbo roundabouts in the Netherlands. The first one built in 1996, the second one in 1999, and then each year about 5, 6, 7 before it was proven to be a success. And then it really started happening. Nowadays we have over 385 turbo roundabouts already in the Netherlands, and over 250 roundabouts outside the Netherlands, mostly Eastern Europe, and not at this moment, not really turbo roundabouts in the US, but hopefully that will change. Well, Bertus Fortuyn's design philosophy was based on the criteria, a safe design by geometry. One of the most radical differences from the US roundabout is the radial process we already mentioned earlier. When a vehicle enters the turbo roundabout, it needs to clear just one lane of about 15 feet by 18 feet. That's the conflict area, what's showing on the image. By comparing with a typical multi-lane roundabout we have in the US, it's not uncommon to see length of this conflict area increases to maybe even 45 feet. So basically introducing a more radial approach than a tangential approach or a left offset decreases the conflict area, so we keep them as small as possible. That's also a benefit for good sight lines. You don't need to look all over the shoulder on the left side to see what kind of traffic is on the roundabout and coming up and where you have to yield for. Also, the radio approach shows a good speed drop at the roundabout. So low speeds on the turbo roundabout and short crossing distance are also beneficial for the capacity. Because you only have to cross a short distance, you can easily see the cars coming. You can estimate the gap and just jump into the inside lane or the outside lane, which lane you want to choose. But because of the radio approach, it's really important to have a great signage in front of the driver. So this is the sign we place just inside the roundabout to show that it is an actual, there is something happening and you don't want to just continue, you have to make a turn. This sign is really important. It's about 3 by 6 feet wide, showing on eye height so that every driver would see there is something happening. Let's start with how they look like. Well, basically, you can design turbo roundabouts with a lot of lanes. Normally, we build them with 1 or 2 lanes on the entrance, as you can see on the left image. But sometimes we go even to 7 lanes on the entrance. These are the really big turbo roundabouts with signals. We will show them later, but those are a little bit more difficult to design and maybe not the best way to start. But the one you see on the left, that is a normal shaped turbo roundabout with 1 or 2 entry lanes. On the exit lanes, you can also vary in number of lanes. On the left side, you see a roundabout with all exit lanes with 2 exit lanes. On the right side, you see a main road with 2 exit lanes and a side road with just single exit lanes. And this is a movie showing how it looks like, a test drive. You can see the nice Dutch area where we produce the turbo roundabouts. You see on this side the signage heading towards the roundabout. We are making a left turn, so we're already on the left side. You see some pavement markings coming up. And then the raised element starts in the approach lanes. When you approach the roundabout, you just have to yield, you jump into the inside lane, and you will be guided through the roundabout to your exit. You blink on your exit and you're guided to the exit without any conflict at the roundabout itself. It's easy. When you're used to it, you can drive every turbo roundabout. So that was the first sneak preview of the turbo roundabout. Let's dig into some more design elements. All design elements and criteria are incorporated in the Dutch national guidelines for turbo roundabouts. That's the CROW publication 257, based on 4x design principles. It's all written down in this document, but of course this is in Dutch, so not really easy to read over here. So I will just show some of the images and design elements that is explained in that document. As mentioned, the spiral geometry is a key element of the turbo roundabout. Fortuin created a smooth spiraled vehicle path by shifting the centers of a 2-lane roundabout by just a lane. The inside lane then aligns to the outside lane, and by rotating the whole, the approaches can connect in a right radial angle. This idea looks easy, but for the actual design, the translation axis should be aligned perfectly to have it aligned to the major approaches to create a similar curvatory for all through traffic at the roundabout. This basic shape is called the turbo block, and later in the presentation, I also have a turbo block for a US design. We will look into that later. There are several design types, several types of turbo roundabouts based on the number of entry lanes and the exit lanes. These are the standard shapes Bertus Fortuin created. As you can see with the blue arrows, those are showing the major volumes that those designs are suitable for. So the first one is the basic shape turbo roundabout, suitable for main roads with high volume side roads. The second one is suitable for smaller side roads. Those entry lanes are, you have lesser entry lanes, so the turbo roundabout is a little bit smaller. You can put a bypass on it for a specific high volume turn movements, but also increase the number of lanes to make it easy for high capacity intersections. So the size-wise, we designed them smaller-wise. It's about 155 feet diameter. The standard size is about 165 feet in diameter, and the larger ones are about 210, 213 feet in diameter. Those are similar to the multi-lane roundabouts as we design in the US in general. And we try to keep the speeds between 23, 25 miles per hour, so as low as possible. The lane separation, the raised lane separation is an important feature for the turbo roundabout because it eliminates the lane movements at the roundabout, in front of the roundabout and after the roundabout. It's discomfort with high speed, but still comfortable on low speed. So if you need, you can run over it, but it's not, basically you don't want to touch them. We designed them with a height of about 2.7 inch, and there are 11.8 inch wide. And we put them about 3 inch inside the pavement so they cannot run off. Another important feature for the turbo roundabout is the opening width. That's the location where the lane separation start is crucial in a good roundabout design. The opening width should suit the situation well. We want to keep the opening width as wide as possible, so most vehicles don't negotiate the curb and can comfortably enter the inside lane, from the inside lane to the inside lane. But we want to keep it as narrow as possible so that it only accommodates the recommended move from the inside lane. So we don't want to invite vehicles from the outside lane to jump into the inside circulatory lane. So that is a bit of a struggle. Keep it as wide as possible, but also keep it as narrow as possible. And that's when we decided to design a special feature we call the droplet, and sometimes it's also called the frog. This area is to extend the start of the mountable curb, the inside curb. When you are in the outside lane, you don't want to cross it. So you are guided to the outer circulatory lane. But the swept path of a larger and oversized trucks from the inside lane can easily enter the inner lane by overriding the droplet. And this is how it looks in more detail. It's just a little bit lower than the elevated raised lane separation, but it's much wider to make people more aware of it. It calls the attention to the lane divider and prevents circulatory traffic from changing the lanes. We designed the droplet as prefab concrete segments that we sank into the pavement, so it's easy to develop and to build. Similar to multi-lane roundabouts in the US, signing and marking is really important. What we want to have is, because we cannot change lanes at the roundabout itself, we need to have upstream clear direction signs with all destination on the roundabout. If possible, we want to create them above the lanes, as you can see on the left bottom image. And when you come closer to the roundabout, we put the direction signs on the pavement, so you know which lane you have to take for a straight or left direction. On the roundabout itself, technically it's not necessary to have arrows on the pavement, because when you are in your lane, you cannot change lanes anymore, you can only exit them. But some road authorities are just adding additional pavement markings on the roundabout itself just to accent the movements. And at the exit, we put destination signs to show which direction you can get if you exit the roundabout at that location. At locations with really high traffic volumes, we introduce the signalized turbo roundabouts. These have the same basic turbo features, so it's spiraled, it has a radial approach, you cannot change lanes at the roundabout, so you have to make your lane decision upstream, and no switching between the direction at the roundabout. Note, these are really bigger. These are specific for high volume intersections with a diameter. These are with a diameter of about 360 feet and way bigger than the normal turbo roundabouts, but can also have high volumes. And volume-wise, we dig into that later. A little bit attention for special users. Sometimes we get questions about how do we operate bicycles on the roundabout. So in the Netherlands, we have a lot of bicycles, so it's important to facilitate them well. To accommodate the bicycles safely, we normally separate the cycle path from the outside, on the outside of the roundabouts. At many high volume roundabouts, we even provide grade separations. For example, the tunnel you can see on the right side. When we do cross the bicycle path at grade, then we put a specific S-shape crossing in the median, as you can see on the right picture. That is a feature based on safety, because if you enter that feature, if you cross the first lanes, go to the median, you will lower your speed because you have to make that S-shape. And because you make that S-shape, you always face towards upcoming traffic. So you always see what's coming, and you can see the traffic you have to yield for. As said, at high volume intersections, we also produce nice bicycle bridges, but that's something maybe a step too far for the US at this moment. For trucks, it's also important that they can take. On this video, you can see this is a truck of about 82.8 feet. A big truck. It's taking the roundabout that has a diameter of about 190 feet, and it's making a left turn. And as you can see, it's using the roundabouts without touching any of the raised elements or the truck aprons. So it's perfectly doable for also really large trucks. Of course, this is a little bit of a different design than the WB67 trucks we have, but we can also accommodate those trucks on these kind of turbo roundabouts. Often we hear also complaints or questions, it's not complaints, questions about the motorcycles, where the elevated lane separations is forgivable for cars. This is not the case for motorcycles. They don't want to hit them. And although these disadvantages, although these disadvantages, we still get the positive response back from the motorcycles, because the smaller chance that drivers unexpectedly make a lane change at the roundabout is received very positive. And this benefit outweighs the risk of hitting the elevated lane separations. And of course, we need to make the roundabouts as safe as possible. So we put warning signs upstream. We repeat the warning signs at center islands. We don't make the raised elements too high, and we use contrasting colors. And this is what it looks like. We have the signs upstream. We have the signs in the center island. And we don't make the lane separations too high, and you can see with using high contrast colors, it's easy to see, and even with the reflectors, you can see them even in the dark pretty well. Traffic flow wise, this is a I will speed up a little bit because we don't have that much time left. I think the capacity of intersections of alternatives is shown in this table. In the table that I have accented is a comparison between a multi-lane roundabout with 2 entries and 2 exits compared to the basic shape turbo roundabouts. And as you can see, the theoretical capacity is similar, but the capacity in practice, it is actually similar. It's about 3,500 vehicles. So the turbo roundabout has a similar capacity as the basic shaped 2x2 roundabout. And that can be explained by this graph. This graph is showing the capacity formula, the capacity based on formulas. The blue is the normal double lane roundabout, and the red or orange one is the turbo roundabout. And as you can see, the turbo roundabout has a higher capacity in situations where the traffic volume on the main road, that's the horizontal axle, is larger than the volume on the secondary road, that's the vertical axle. So when you see when the traffic on the main road is increasing, there is still more possible. It's more possible to enter the roundabout at the turbo roundabout compared to the multi-lane roundabout, and that can be explained by a better lane utilization. Traffic entering the roundabout are less hesitant, and we think also about the radial approach. So the turbo roundabout is suitable for locations with high main volume at locations where you still need to have volume at the side roads. Then next step is bringing the turbo roundabout to the US. Everything we did in the Netherlands and in other countries, it is gathered into a report produced by the Federal Highway Administration. So this synthesis report is available to download. It pulls together all turbo roundabout information from across the globe, from the Netherlands specific, but also from other places in Europe and all over the world. And if we look into the elements that need to be adjusted or when we implement it in the US, well, we already have some spiral layouts in the US. That's something we already used to. The next step would be adding the lane separation and use the lane choice upstream as important. For GDOT, we help GDOT by updating their roundabout design guide. And together with GDOT, we designed some turbo roundabout features and implemented them in our double lane of multi-lane roundabouts. And this is an image showing how to design the spiral design used in the turbo roundabouts suitable for WB67 trucks. And this is a turbo block case 3, so for WB67 side by side. And how we designed this is we used the WB67 swept paths, 2 trucks next to each other, side by side. And when you just do the same trick as we showed earlier, you take the 2 circles, you shift them a lane and rotate them, you get the turbo block. But technically, that turbo block is not finished, because when you use the 67 trucks, this WB67 trucks, you will get a lane width of about 21 feet. And that's way too much for the normal cars. They can fly over the roundabout with high speeds. So we need to do something for that. And the solution for that is the raised elements. So a trailer can override those raised elements, but the normal car will not do that. And the raised elements we designed based on a similar approach. We used the WB67 swept path circles, but we added the swept path of a bus or a WB40 inside. When you align those on the outside of the 2 lanes, you can see there is a difference between the swept paths. And that difference can be filled with that raised element of about 6 to 7 feet. And when you do that, you will the result will be just a lane width of about 14 feet. And that's perfectly suitable for normal cars. That's a safe lane width for a double lane, for a multi-lane roundabout. And by doing this, you will still keep your the diameter of 200 to 210 feet. That's similar to a normal double lane roundabout as we designed in the US earlier. And that raised element is an important feature because it impacts the fastest path. And this is the basic safety feature you can see in this image. When you put the fastest path in your design, you can see what happens. If you look at the blue fastest path, you can see that it's impacted by the raised elements, and it will already start at the approach. Because you have the raised element at your approach, vehicle cannot use both lanes anymore. So they are forced to use the right lane to jump into the outside lane and to leave the roundabout to the exit. And by implementing the raised elements, we will be able to reduce the speed at the roundabout from about 30 miles per hour at the multi-lane roundabout from this size to just 22 miles per hour with the raised elements. And that is a big safety benefit. If you look at the signing and markings of a turbo roundabout, you can use basically similar signing and markings as we use at the traditional multi-lane roundabout. So use the same signs, use the same arrow markings, use the same striping, so that a roundabout would look similar the turbo roundabout would look similar to the multi-lane roundabout as we are used to here. Next step in the implementation in the US is basically, well, we already have work in process. We already adjusted the multi-lane roundabouts, minor adjustments to fit US design vehicles, as we showed before. We have to adjust the roundabout designs to preference of agencies. Some agencies like to have the radial approach, some like to have the tangential designs. The left offsets, that's a discussion we will have with the agencies. And basically what we showed, you can design a turbo roundabout with both radial approach as we do in the Netherlands, but also a left offset approach as showed at GDOT's designs. And what is important, design should fit to the driver expectations. So basically keeping the same sort of layout as in signs, markings and striping, keep it the same, then people will understand what to do at the roundabout. Steps that needs to be taken, that's for the near future. That's basically creating an introduction and raise understanding of the concept to the public. It's important that people know what a roundabout is, what a turbo roundabout is, and how they should use it. But they also should know what the benefits are, because when you don't understand the benefits, then the people will not accept it. And I would say start with a simple test case turbo roundabout, not build the big ones with signal lights, with traffic signals, but just a simple one at a location that is with normal traffic volumes. We always need to monitor and evaluate driving behavior and safety and operation, so we can maybe adjust the roundabout designs later. And of course, some calibration and validation of the US driving behavior to understand better what a turbo roundabout will do in the US. I hope that we will build the multi-lane roundabouts as a turbo roundabout shape in the next few years. I think many will pop up in the near future, at least in design and in planning stages, and hopefully also being created in the next at least next year. If so, then at least my work is done. And I hope that with this kind of presentations, people will understand what a turbo roundabout is, and that the acceptance will be improved. This is what I wanted to share with you. I can understand that there are questions and discussions. There's a place for that. As we say in the Netherlands, vragen en discussie. I'm open for questions and discussions. If there are, please put them in the Q&A box and we can have that discussion.
I've got a quick question for you. Yep. Is there a measurable cost difference between the turbo roundabout and the multi-lane roundabout? Anything?
There is a difference in cost. The difference in cost is basically because we have to implement some raised elements. So you have to tailor-made some of those elements. In the Netherlands, we do it prefab. In the US, we have to experiment with that a little bit. So you have additional elements. But I think also that when you do a more radial approach, you can save right of way. But the most important thing in the cost is the benefit. If you look at the safety benefit and a BC ratio, the turbo roundabout will be safer. And will earn itself back in the 20 years of your design life. So even if it costs maybe 10% more, but you save way more, you save crashes or injuries, the BC ratio will always benefit the turbo roundabout.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a worthwhile investment. Extra cost for the safety benefit buy off it.
Yeah.
I guess, thinking back to your time in the Netherlands, were there any certain road categories or speed limits that dictated when you could design a turbo roundabout?
Well, basically, and that's also showing at this kind of image. This is a location of 2 turbo roundabouts at the exit of a freeway. So at the freeway, we have a speed limit of 55 miles per hour or even 60 miles per hour. So when you leaving the freeway, you reach the turbo roundabout with that kind of speed. So you will drop your speed at the turbo roundabout. The arterials over here on the right side has a speed limit of about 45 miles per hour, 50 miles per hour. And on the left side, that's near the city, there's the speed limit of 35 miles per hour. So basically you can design and create turbo roundabouts at every kind of road category. Not actually at the freeway, but on the exits, it's possible to do. And it accents also the difference in speed limits. So once you pass the roundabout, it is, well, it's clear that you have a different speed limit happening.
Cool. We had a question from the audience. I think you may have touched on this one already. It says, what's the largest inscribed diameter for a turbo roundabout? And you get several different diameters. But
yeah, so diameter wise, we want to keep it as small as possible, because the smaller you have them, the lower the speeds. But you also have to design them well for your design vehicle. The basic shape turbo roundabout as we design in the Netherlands, it is that 165 feet of diameter. But at locations where we have high truck volumes, we grow them to over 200 feet to provide a little bit more guidance for those larger trucks. The really big ones with 7 entry lanes and traffic signals, yeah, those grow over 300 feet. But those are just large turbo roundabouts. The basic shape you see in this movie, these are 165 feet in diameter.
Peter Kaufman had a question that says, does it matter around which point you revolve the turbo roundabout block?
I don't understand the question well. How you rotate the turbo block, or?
I think that's what he's.
Yeah.
I guess, so we'll give Peter a chance to respond back.
I think
Stephen
there
had a
was
question.
Slide, maybe a couple slides back, where there was an image that you had where the turbo roundabout was this one, maybe this one. This may be what he's referring to.
Yeah, so it's probably the question where you want to align, how far you want to shift or rotate the circles. Basically, that is for every location that's specific, because you want to align the approaches on the right angle, so that the entering traffic will have a clear trajectory. I'm not sure if I can show pointer options, laser point. I can maybe. So if you have your entry lane over here, if you have your main road over here and your side road over here, and you have your center points over here, you want to have the distance between, yeah, that's a little bit technical, but you want to rotate it as far as necessary to have a similar distance from the center to this lane as the center to this lane. So there's a trick on how you, I don't have it in my slide, how far you need to rotate it. No, it's not in my presentation, and I had it before. Sorry.
That's
Next time
fine.
we'll put it in.
Stephen had a question. How many truckers complain about narrow lanes, or does that happen a lot?
And we don't have them. No. We designed the roundabout so that your cabin always stays inside the lane. And those raised elements are easy to overtrack by your trailer if necessary. Of course, you don't want to create, when you're at locations where you have high truck volumes, you need to have a well-designed turbo roundabout with a nice diameter that they can just use the normal road for it. As you saw on that image earlier, those large trucks, that is quite a location with a distribution center, high truck volumes. Those are a little bit wider. We don't get a lot of complaints about trucks that cannot use them well. It needs to be said that our trucks are a little bit smaller than the WB67 trucks. Our design vehicle, it's more similar to a 62 or a little bit between 62 and 67s. But as long as you design your roundabout well with that the cabin can stay on the pavement itself and not using any raised element or truck apron, I think no trucker will complain.
That's good. I'm glad trucks can still navigate the roundabout, so that's important.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know, do we have any other questions? I don't see any of the questions in the chat box or the question box. Oh, here's one. Peter's got another question. It says, are there any concerns about speed control on entry? Looks like GDOT figure that shown tries to incorporate entry deflection like we usually see in the US.
Yes. That is what we had a big discussion with GDOT on speed control and the entrance. And in this design, we used that slightly left offset to decrease the speed at the entrance. In the Netherlands, we don't see that issue happening. People are slowing down. They see something is happening with that clear sign. You know you have to slow down, and it's more really, well, you have to make a turn at the roundabout almost. That's what it's showing with nice speed instead of a yielding as in the ones you see in the US more. At high speed approaches, you can use some additional deflection or add some additional speed control measures to lower the speed. That's basically similar to any multi-lane roundabout or any roundabout in the US, I think.
Well, you mentioned in the Netherlands, they've been around for like 30-something years. How can we better educate the US public to embrace the roundabout? Media campaigns, videos, or what do you think?
Yeah, that's a really good question because it's really important to educate people. I think, and that's always important when you start a project in an area and it includes a roundabout in general or turbo roundabout in specific, you need to have proper material, slides, information, video, and a good story for the local people. You have to make sure that everybody understands what it is about, how to use it, but also what the benefits is. I know that sometimes you can even take a parking space, put with tape or something or paint your turbo roundabout on it, and you can have people just taking the roundabout and try to use it on your parking space. In general, I think, and that is me as a Dutchman complaining about the general education of, well, getting your driver license in the US, I think it would be beneficial to get additional information when you get your driver license, or when you have to, maybe that's an idea, when you renew your driver license, provide some information about new technologies, new intersections, just a flyer on what is new in the area, what is and how that will look like. It's not only the roundabout, but maybe any other development that can be important.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. That's a great idea, which providing drivers an update when they renew their license. Just a lot of us, it's been a while since we took our driver's license test, so we haven't seen it, all that information in a while. Reminding the average public what things are about and the rules.
Things change, and driver expectation is really important. So if you provide at least some information that people understand what can happen, then that is already a safety benefit, I think.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's a very informative presentation. I don't see any other questions, so I think we'll move on to the next presentation. I think really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So to keep it, I had a break scheduled, but I think to keep us on track, I'm gonna go ahead and skip that break and go straight into the third presenter. Our third presentation today will be presented by actually three people. So we've got Jeff Brenham, Evan Hoffman, and Zach Roberts from the city of Knoxville presenting. The title of their presentation is Knoxville's Signal Modernization Initiative. Jeff graduated Virginia Tech in 1991 and has worked in transportation engineering for 25 years. He's the traffic engineering chief in Knoxville and is responsible for the signing and marking systems, parking systems on street lighting systems, traffic systems, and traffic operations in Knoxville. Zach Roberts graduated from the University of Tennessee with a bachelor's and master's in civil engineering. He has previous experience in forensic engineering and has also worked for the city of Maryville, Tennessee. His current position is with the city of Knoxville as a traffic operations manager, where he has been for 6 years. Evan Hoffman is an engineer for the city of Knoxville's traffic operations group, has been with the city for 6 years as well. Evan graduated from Tennessee Tech in 2014 and recently became licensed in the state of Tennessee. Please help me welcome Jeff, Zach, and Evan as they present Knoxville's Signal Modernization Initiative. Let me stop sharing.
Thank you, Luke. I'll start when the, I guess you get the slides up there.
Is that showing the right view?
Yep, that was good.
Perfect. Well, Luke, I'd like to thank TSITE and all the sponsors for putting this on. This has been really great. Really enjoyed that last presentation too. Learned a lot. We've kind of created a general presentation about some of that really highlights a lot of our significant accomplishments, but it also highlights some ongoing projects as well. I think you'll see that it also illustrates some pretty extraordinary leadership that we have in Knoxville, especially with our administration. We really have been given a lot of different objectives, but the primary and project objectives that we always have is to serve all of our roadway users, to always align their needs with our efforts, seek their input, and stay safety focused and proactive. These are not easy objectives. You'll see throughout the presentation many of our efforts, which, like I said, are they're very high level highlights, but there's been a lot of work put into a lot of these things. But I think one of the real special things about a lot of what Knoxville's doing is our proactive search for external partners and the way we work and communicate with them. But in addition to that, we also have made incredible efforts to internally communicate with our own internal departments like our information systems group and our Knoxville Police Department, and many of our other internal groups like our 311 service. There's just a lot of different things we've done to streamline and make efficient the services we provide, and some of those will be highlighted today. But also one other thing that's very important is we are always looking toward the future, trying to understand best practices that we need to be deploying, tools that we need to use, as well as just developing projects that are ready for future utilization. So I guess with that very general introduction, I'll turn it over to Zach and Evan to actually present the material. But thank you for having us.
All right, thanks for that, Jeff. So we really have two means that we've been upgrading our transportation network. We've got our, our day-to-day operations efforts and our major projects. So I'll start by discussing the major ATMS projects that we have ongoing. And our efforts really start at the planning level. We've several broad plans that have been adopted to help guide our investment in the transportation network. In summer of 2019, our city council adopted a comprehensive overhaul of our zoning ordinances. This project has been called Recode Knoxville. We have several ongoing ATMS projects, and our ATMS master plan is a living document that establishes our standards of equipment and our network priorities. Vulnerable users are a priority for us, so we have several bicycle specific plans that are in place to help develop a more complete bicycle network at both the local and the regional level. This network consists of shared lanes, dedicated facilities, and shared use paths, with the goal being to allow bicycle travel safely throughout the entire city. And every effort is being made to develop data-driven safety programs rather than being reactive in addressing safety. Our parking systems are also being modernized, as that's an important element of trips to downtown and other destinations. Our partnerships with other departments and agencies are crucial to the success of this vision. We have partnerships with our electrical utility providers, and they recognize the city as a priority. They give us some dedicated space on their poles, which reduces conflict with existing pole users and reduces the utility make-ready burden on all of these projects. Fiber sharing improves the reliability by providing redundancy and resiliency to both city and TDOT networks, provides redundancy as a backup route during communications outages, and resiliency provides the potential for multiple data paths, multiple transmission paths, so that routing can be optimized based on the most efficient path. We're able to test ITS technologies in our network in real-world situations with advanced user detection and other emerging technologies. We want to be a proving ground, but not necessarily a test bed. We're happy to be able to help test newer and less established technologies, but we always want to have constraints in place to make sure that we're not creating dangerous situations on our network. The Public Building Authority provides management and enforcement of our parking facilities in and around the downtown area. ITS facilities in the downtown garages help reduce the congestion by providing real-time vacancy information. We work closely with Knox Area Transit in both an operations capacity with management of bus stops and detours, as well as some other things, and also on major projects, one of which I'll discuss in a minute. We also partner with the university to provide research opportunities on live traffic situations. A few years ago, as part of the SPAT challenge, that's signal phasing and timing, UT, in collaboration with the city, was able to get SPAT broadcasts set up within a relatively short time frame and learn some of the benefits and constraints with the current technologies. The university also offers valuable insight into best practices and standards. They've also provided investment for infrastructure that serves users both on and off campus. They've contributed to the cost of major signal projects along Cumberland Avenue, which is immediately adjacent to the university campus. The new zoning codes in Knoxville start with the broad citywide codes. These codes can affect the transportation network by dictating development requirements such as parking, driveway, and access management. But beyond those citywide codes, we also have form-based codes, which these apply to overlay districts. So where appropriate, they supersede the citywide code. And each form-based code district is subdivided, and each sub-district has its own vision plan and its own growth strategy with specifics on density, types of structures, and a bunch of other zoning variables. A major part of the form-based code is the streetscape standards. So these standards include things like on-street parking, bike lanes, wherever appropriate, and roadway cross-section design elements. And so the city has been targeting arterials with major streetscapes projects, and the form-based code dictates the investment that must be made by the developers, where renovations on parcels that front roadways within the form-based code districts. So for example, the city came in and did a road diet and streetscapes project on Cumberland Avenue. And then as the surrounding blocks develop, that investment is taken care of by those individual developers. And then similarly, in the South Waterfront Form-Based Code District, the code establishes standards for riverscaping, which includes a shared use path that traverses the riverbank. The ATMS master plan is a living document that helps outline the broader vision for citywide ATMS investments. And it's the culmination of collaborative efforts and discussions between internal and external stakeholders, provides a framework for these various parties and systems to work together in coordination for a complete smart transportation system. The plan establishes an inventory of our existing communication corridors, and it also catalogs our future needs, provides standardization for various ITS elements and equipment, and it also prioritizes our future ATMS projects. And this is an exhibit from that plan. Shows some of the major corridors in yellow. You can see on the various interstate routes that pass through Knoxville. TDOT has state-owned fiber, and then we have an agreement in place for fiber sharing between the city and the state, and in exchange we'll be offering part of our network along corridors such as Kingston Pike and Broadway. The major corridors being addressed with the active ATMS projects will soon provide fiber optic communications between our traffic management center and 155 intersections along 4 major corridors, and then the area around downtown and UT campus. So phase 1, which is at a 95+% design right now, will provide modernization and communications to 44 intersections along Kingston Pike, 17 intersections along Chapman Highway to the south, and 30 intersections heading out of town to the north on Broadway. Middlebrook which connects to our public service building where the traffic management center is. We'll do the same for 25 intersections. And then several corridors make up the UT campus or the UT area project, which includes 39 intersections. And some of the elements of these projects, wherever possible, our ATMS projects will be using fiber optic communications, which will be connected back to that public service building, or public works building, I'm sorry, at Morris Avenue, which is off of Middlebrook Pike. We are trying to move to above ground detection for better functioning and reliability. Our video detection of choice is MyoVision cameras. And connected vehicle infrastructure is a topic that's a bit up in the air right now due to the recent legislation, but all of our ATMS projects also include vehicle to infrastructure technology in their scope, and we're continuing to explore in partnership with the state various technology standards to determine which one is appropriate for the city of Knoxville. We're currently taking proposals from vendors and evaluating options for central ATMS software. Equipment interoperability is a big concern for us, and we like to heavily involve our field personnel in the decision-making process. Their input with their real-world experience is great insight into which features to prioritize and things to watch out for. And cabinet hardware will be replaced at each of the 155 intersections over approximately 40 miles that are in the scope of the ATMS projects. Many of these intersections already have ATC controllers and other modern equipment. So these projects will give us the opportunity to reallocate some of these other pieces of hardware, which will further increase the impact of these projects on our network. One of our partners is CAT. They're in the process of modernizing their transit systems, and CAT and the city and some of our consultants are coordinating to make sure that our goals and our systems are in alignment. Some of the things that CAT has in the works right now include an upgrading of their existing vehicle location system and computer-aided dispatch, modern passenger information systems, so they will be going to a mobile app, as well as real-time electronic signage, which will be in place at the downtown transit center, as well as at some of the more technology-equipped stops. They're expanding their fare collection system to include mobile payment and reloadable smart cards. And their vehicles will provide real-time maintenance information back to their maintenance center for better scheduling of that maintenance. These, they're in the procurement process right now. These improvements are scheduled to begin this fall. One project that we're working on in coordination with CAT is an accelerated bus corridor along the Broadway corridor. North Broadway Route 22 is the highest ridership bus route in the city, and land use along the corridor provides a great opportunity for it to serve as a commuter route. CAT would like to further incentivize ridership with an added express service option. In conjunction with our active ATMS project that includes North Broadway, this corridor should have fiber optic communications along the entire extent by the time this project goes to construction. The existing cross-section on North Broadway already uses the majority of the available right-of-way, so bus-exclusive facilities aren't a realistic option. That really restricts the amount of travel time improvement that's possible with this project. So this project aims to improve the transit experience primarily by reducing the headway of buses and improving schedule reliability for bus arrivals. keep those buses on schedule, we're making use of the available space at some priority intersections to implement transit signal priority and queue jump lanes. And these are placed very strategically along the route. Enhanced vehicle detection will also improve the performance of the corridor as a whole. And that will also be established partly in the Broadway ATMS project. Now, Route 22 has many heavy trip generation centers, but in the areas in between, a lot of existing stops are being evaluated for consolidation. So approximately a quarter of the stops may be consolidated to balance realistic walking distances to local stops with the overall corridor performance. Some of the constraints this project has seen, intersections that are already operating at or near capacity limit the effectiveness of signal preemption in some locations. And then initially we were evaluating this as an express route overlay. So we would have the local route, the existing Route 22 with an express route on top of that. But the operating impacts of that just aren't justifiable with the ridership. So that's why we've gone to this consolidated single route option. Utility make-ready is a really stressful part of any ITS project. Our partnerships with utility pole owners are helping to give us a clearer path forward there. We have a blanket agreement with KUB that establishes a dedicated space for City of Knoxville communications at 42 inches below the neutral. And this applies citywide. So at some point in the future, theoretically, the city will have a reserved space on most of the poles for future deployments of fiber or other communications. In the meantime, this agreement doesn't immediately resolve existing conflicts. So a project-specific agreement was reached between the city and KUB to allow the city to share the SCADA space with KUB. This reduces the need for relocation within our ATMS utility make-ready. But due to regulations on who can perform work in the high voltage space at and above 30 inches, this agreement stipulates that KUB is the one managing the city fiber in this space. And these agreements are already in place with KUB, but we have similar agreement in progress with LCUB. Those are our two major electrical utility providers in Knoxville. By establishing these standards, the city only needs to worry about utility make-ready on third-party owned poles. So that drastically cuts back the utility make-ready burden placed on our ATMS projects. Evan is heavily involved with our signal operations teams, so I'll let him discuss some of the things that we're doing in that regard.
Thanks, Zach, and thank you to TSITE for the opportunity today to present. I know Jeff, Zach, and I are glad to present these advanced traffic management and operational efforts on behalf of our city. So I'm going to go over some of our safety standards that we've implemented in our signal shop and some of the modernization efforts for equipment around our city. So starting off, our signal shop has prepared standard operating procedures in our city to really protect our people, boots on the ground with a safe working environment, with best practices in the field through this SOP. This SOP ensures compliance with OSHA, TOSHA, NEC, IMSA, NEMA, and other engineering standards. Another way that we keep up with these safety standards is scheduled training for our individuals in the field. They keep up with their IMSA certifications, and we recently had all of our technicians take arc flash training so that they're able to operate in the cabinet with high voltage electricity. So that way they can stay cutting edge in what they do and stay safe out in the field. Some of the other safety standards that we've implemented through our cabinet infrastructure or various arc flash items is we've placed arc flash stickers on every cabinet in the city. And as I said, all of our technicians are certified for arc flash inside of the cabinet. Some cabinet components we've worked on is changing load resistors to load capacitors to reduce heat in the cabinet. This also allows for easier individual maintenance, and they can swap without putting the signal in flash. So you have less possibility for accidents while the intersection's on flash. You don't have individuals in the intersection trying to direct traffic or anything like that. So also on that note, surge compression, change outs for easier individual maintenance on the back panel. And something big of note that Philip Reyes and his team did was change mercury contactors in our cabinets to solid state contactors. It was a very time-inducing process, but that essentially provides better environmental safety at all of our cabinet locations in the city. Work order tracking, we implemented a platform around 4 years ago that allows us to track our work order efforts through 311, inputted work orders by the engineers with the city, or trouble calls generated by our police department. And we can also schedule preventative maintenance through that platform. And equipment inventories. Our team has implemented inventories for all of our items in the shop so that we can order those when they're needed, and we can do that with the budget that we're provided each year. Next slide, Zach. Modern procurement. So Zach kind of touched on this a bit, but we certainly have involvement with different areas throughout the city and with CAT as well on evaluation of these different technologies in our city. So our information systems department, making sure they're involved so that they know what is on our backbone of our city. And we always have to include our purchasing department for procurement of all of these technologies as well. So in evaluating of these technologies, we have to make sure our ATC components, like our controllers, our conflict monitors, and our ongoing central ATMS software, that they're all compatible together as well, that they all mesh together. And around 2 years ago, we did a video detection request for proposal in obtaining overhead detection that's capable of data collection in the future. So we went through I guess a demo in the street with several vendors and selected 2 vendors that we have contracts with so that we can install data collection, video detection as needed and when we're provided enough money in our budget. So that's another improvement. And school zone flashers, I'll touch on this in a later slide, but we've certainly improved that portion of our system as well. In 2015, our team revised the TDOT 730 spec for traffic signals to more closely align with some of the things that our signal shop does in the street and the kind of the equipment that they like to use for easier maintenance. So that document's always being worked on and being revised through TDOT for their approval. So some items include adding proprietary detection such as myovision for video detection and wavetronics for radar, having battery backup systems in all of our cabinets, standardizing our wiring scheme for signal heads, pedestrian signals, push buttons, audible push buttons, just so when something goes bad in the street, our guys are ready to go out in the field and repair that quickly. And also adding accessible pedestrian systems to comply with ProWag and all of those improvements. Next slide, Zach. Now I'll touch on some signal modernization efforts as far as components inside of our cabinet. We have 392 signalized intersections within the city limits. Some of our major arterials coincide with Knox County, but they are in control of those signals, and we communicate sometimes to keep those corridors running well. As far as components, all 392 intersections, the conflict monitors have been replaced in those cabinets. We've replaced 189 controllers in the cabinet to ATC, which correlates to 48%, and changed out 68 or 17% of our 8-phase cabinets to 16-phase cabinets with our standardized TS2 Type 2 cabinets. And planned controllers and cabinets as far in correlation with our ATMS projects that Zach talked about. We've planned 155 controllers that will get us to 88% ATC throughout our city, and 125 16-phase cabinets along those corridors as well to get us to 49%. Another big component and towards modernizing our city and bringing our backbone back to our Morris Avenue building for our traffic management center is having vehicle detection, but also capable of data collection so that we can, I guess, improve our locations and how those places are timed, but also view any operational items that maybe we could improve on. So we use MyVision Traffic Link. They have a great online portal where we can view these intersections with data collection. The picture here is Cumberland Avenue at Circle Drive. It's in the heart of University of Tennessee campus. So one benefit to these cameras along this corridor is we could view game day situations, see how we could possibly improve along that corridor, but also class change times can become very hectic in the area. So we have 14 intersections capable of obtaining volume counts. We're hoping to vastly increase that with our ATMS projects. Again, these provide live video feeds, and we'd like to implement automated traffic signal performance measures in the future at these intersections. We also have Grid Smart in our city at 4 intersections, and they also do some research on Bluetooth device travel time throughout our city. And our other vendor for video detection is ITS Plus. We can obtain collect data through their platform, but we have to do it at the cabinet. So we prefer MyVision in this sense, but ITS Plus is a great secondary option for us as well. Some of our other efforts as far as communications, And our school flasher system, we've upgraded 99 intersections with high-speed wireless radios and around 50 intersections with fiber optics. One thing our team does really well is bridging the gap between some of these different communications, such as radios and fiber optics. And sometimes a lot of those intersections, we don't even have those. So our team does a great job in figuring out how to bridge those gaps as far as communications. Accessible pedestrian signals. We've upgraded around 35 intersections with APS as part of capital improvement projects around the city. So that has been a great improvement towards walkability for pedestrians in our city. And our school flashers system, to highlight that, we have 164 school flashers in our city limits. Our old school flasher system, we didn't have the capability of remoting in scheduling changes for these schools or obtaining maintenance alerts to repair a bulb or if something else is wrong at the school flasher. So it was a very time-inducive process each year to touch base with these schools, go out to each cabinet and change all of the times that they need to be. But now it's just a simple email or a request that we can go in and change and remote those online. So that has been a wonderful upgrade for our team.
Open data is a priority for the city, and that includes providing valuable data to the public, as well as leveraging potential sources of data to improve our own operations. One way we're providing data to the public is through our automated road closures feed. Every permitted closure inside the city is geo-referenced and stored on the KGIS SDE. And from there, it's displayed on a map program on the city website, and a JSON feed is produced from the GIS feature class, which is output to Waze through their Connected Citizens program. Currently, that's the only mapping provider that utilizes the feed, but the city is open to providing the data in other schemas to other partnership programs if they become available to us. And our Emergency Operations Center is currently looking to add features for emergency closures like flooding. Waze Connected Citizens program also gives us access to data sets for traffic operations data, such as travel time and incident reporting. Corridors can be established to evaluate A/B route-based travel times, and vehicle speeds are cross-referenced against historical data to determine when backups occur. And these alerts are available through a web portal or email notifications. The Waze API provides more in-depth tools as well, which we are excited to explore in the future. We've also got access to the INRIX data through the partnership with TDOT, and we're evaluating for some of our other projects, some other crowdsourced data, such as the streetlight data and WEJO connected vehicle data that's collected from the OEMs. And we'll talk about a few of our site-specific ITS projects that we've implemented in the past few years. Evan, you can take this one.
I'll briefly touch on this one, and then I'll pass it back to Zach on some of our passive detection for vulnerable users around the city. But this was one project we did last year where we were trying to come up with a solution along Dale Avenue. It's just off of I-40 near the downtown Knoxville area with campus, University of Tennessee campus just to the south. But the scenario here is just to the right of that picture, there is a lot of soccer fields where you have a high amount of pedestrians with parking lots on the other side of the north side of the road. So you had these pedestrians with a lot of children crossing the street here with vehicles traveling 40, 45 miles an hour at times. And and we're trying to find a way to get vehicles to yield to these pedestrians so we didn't have someone possibly hit or killed. So we identified a high intensity activated crosswalk, or known as a hawk signal. They're not, I can't think of any that I know in our area, immediate area, but I have heard of a few in the state. So we identified this as a good location for first install in Knoxville. It's a one-way street, so we only had to install this in one direction. In the picture here, this is us installing it right before pavement markings aren't down yet, but it was a great project for us in helping our vulnerable users in the area.
Okay, Evan mentioned that we're prioritizing passive vulnerable user detection as well. So this location at the intersection of Broadway and Cecil, Broadway is a 5-lane arterial with an ADT in this area of approximately 30,000 vehicles per day. And right-of-way constraints really restrict our ability to install pedestrian signal infrastructure here. There is a signal head, but there's no room for push-button poles. Several years ago, a mother and her child were attempting to cross Broadway eastbound. As they were halfway across the intersection, the phase changed and a vehicle in the rightmost lane accelerated very quickly. The driver didn't see the pedestrians and the mother was struck and killed. So we saw this as an opportunity to try to implement something that we hadn't done before. The intersection is semi-actuated with induction loops on Cecil Avenue, but we installed a grid smart fisheye camera specifically for pedestrian detection. And this allows us to establish detection zones wherever we need within the view of the camera. So first we placed detection zones at both corners of the Broadway crossing to input pedestrian calls for service. Since installation of pedestrian poles adhering to ADA standards isn't possible due to site conditions, this allows the pedestrians to get service without having to wait for a vehicle to pull up on the side street or to cross against the signal. The Grid Smart camera also allowed us to set detection zones within the intersection. The camera allows us to set detection parameters, so not every user within a detection zone places a call to a controller, only if it meets certain criteria. And these in-crosswalk detection zones pick up pedestrians based on movement perpendicular to Broadway, so anything moving parallel to Broadway is ignored. So that distinguishes pedestrians from vehicles that are just pulled up past the stop bar, like you can see in this photo. And the controller used at this intersection is programmed with logic statements that can tell the signal at certain points in the cycle when a pedestrian is detected in the crosswalk, a green extension is given to the side street phase. So if a pedestrian gets stranded as the phase is changing, the signal can recognize this and it'll extend the green up to a certain point. Another area that we're doing something similar is downtown at the intersection of Henley and Clinch. Henley Street here is a divided, it changes, but it's a 6 or 7 or 8 lane arterial that cuts through downtown. It's a significant barrier for cyclists, with most of the crossings occurring at this one intersection, as the other intersections aren't really bicycle appropriate. Downtown is to the east, and the UT campus and surrounding areas are to the west. And then Henley carries approximately 38,000 cars per day. It connects both major interstates to the north, as well as several other arterials, to South Knoxville across Henley Street Bridge and onto the Seymour and Sevierville area. So it's a really major corridor for cars. And the bicycle traffic varies year to year, but it typically serves about 100 bicycles a day. And this intersection also serves 1,000 to 2,000 pedestrians per day, but A pedestrian bridge across Henley really alleviates the pressure from that foot traffic. Clinch Avenue is split phased, and the eastbound approach has a pretty low volume, vehicle volume that is. This approach is slightly upgrade, so crossing the 150-foot wide intersection can be pretty intimidating for a casual cyclist. And because the vehicle volume is relatively low, the split times for this approach are kind of short, and the phase will also gap out pretty quickly. An avid cyclist can make it across the intersection pretty easily, but as you can see, it can be pretty intimidating to cross quickly for many. And it's not a safe situation to have cyclists stranded when 7 lanes of traffic on Henley are released. So again, we have inductive loop detection here for cars, but using myovision detection that can identify and classify vehicles as bikes, as well as similar logic statements in our ATC controller, we're able to see when a cyclist is still in the intersection during the side street phase and request a green extension. So we are experiencing some issues with this, but when it works, it's able to keep bicycles from being stranded in this dangerous intersection. And with that, we're right at 45 minutes. If y'all have any questions, we can answer them here, or I've got our contact information here if you'd like to ask something a little more in depth.
Quick question for you. You mentioned myovision and GridSmart cameras. So are y'all using both of them, and what are the pros and cons? Which one do you like better? I know you chose myovision, but
we use both. We use both of them. We use myovision a lot more than GridSmart. myovision we're using as proprietary, our proprietary video detection, and I think we're hoping on using it on our ATMS projects. Is that right, Zach?
Yes, that is correct.
So pros and cons, I know we like the myovision platform a lot, the traffic link platform. GridSmart was involved in our procurement process. I think this was right when they were purchased by Cubic. So I think that may have had something to do with why they weren't chosen in our evaluation.
so it sounds like you're going towards myovision then for the future. Are you gonna? That'll be. Will be exclusive myovision from now on, or you're going to still continue to use both of them?
I think
there's room for both,
Okay.
but myovision is certainly the standard on our major projects going forward.
Correct.
Jeff may have more input.
Yeah, I was going to say, you know, we actually use both cameras, and they are very similar in their applications. We see probably the most difference in the way they deploy the hardware and the APIs they use and the way we interface with our technicians. The overall functionality and even the performance measures they produce are similar. And we've really had good results from both. And it's only because of the procurement process and the way it played out with their purchase of, or the Cubic larger company purchasing them, and they actually withdrew from our procurement process right when we were finalizing it. So I believe, you know, when we redo our procurement, they'll certainly be in the competition, I'm sure. And it's very possible that we will be, you know, looking at, you know, having all 3 of these vendors in there. The ITS solution is, you know, they also do the data probe element, but they are much less capable at bringing that data back to a central location. And they also do not provide the aggregation on a third-party server so that you can get the really nice performance matrix and the alerts like the myovision and the GridSmart systems have. But GridSmart continues to do research and development. They also extend to us all the equipment that they use in our streets. They're, of course, locally, they have a local presence here in Knoxville. and we consider them partners. They work very well with us, and I believe both systems are, I'm not going to say equally capable, but they're comparably capable.
Okay, that's good to know. So my next question is, I actually had a question about Make Ready, and you covered this in your presentation. I thought it was interesting that y'all have reserved communication space. That's great. That can definitely speed up the timeline of a project and reduce cost if you already got reserved space. How did you go about setting that up? Was that just an agreement between you and the utilities, Knoxville and utilities? Was that a lot of legwork to get that set up?
Yeah, we actually work pretty hard with our utility companies to facilitate that. I guess the typical communications company is quite a bit different than, you know, a municipal traffic operation and the traffic network needs. So we really, even though KUB did provide us a 42-inch attachment location, which, like Zach mentioned, in the future will be great for future deployments of ATMS. You know, right now we have, you know, it's below 42 inches. There's a lot of non-compliance that's on those poles, just due to the fact that a lot of those attachments have been there for 20 years, and some of them were put in before attachment policies were in place. So there's just a lot of conflicts to be resolved below 42 inches anytime you do anything. Even though we'd be at the top, there would be a lot of movement and adjustments needed no matter where we're at, pretty much in the city. So getting that 30-inch SCADA attachment was really, really important to us to reduce the amount of attachment coordination, but also to KUB, because it's also disruptive to them to have to attend to the management of a major relocation like that on almost 40 miles of road, or actually 26 miles of road for the current agreement. So getting in that SCADA space really helped us in this phase 1 deployment for both KUB and the city, and actually for all the communications companies that now don't have to coordinate with us for that project. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's definitely good to know. Let's see, we've got Kevin Counts asked, are y'all still using spread spectrum? Not sure what that.
I'd say you're talking about I'd say he's talking about our radio systems, and we do still use spread spectrum 900 megahertz radios. We have went to the micro hard. We actually procured through an evaluation process with our procurement a radio that's what's considered a high-speed radio, which is about a 1.5 megabytes per second radio, but it's at 900 megahertz. So you still get really good distance, and you get really good reliability and pretty good throughput. Not quite what you need for like a DSRC or even a video stream, although you can do some video with very low frame rates with a 1.5 megabyte per second throughput. Hope that answers your question.
Are you planning on putting in fiber for most of your intersections, or a majority of the intersections will be fiber interconnected at some point versus radio? Yeah, our current ATMS objectives, right now we are really in what we would call phase 1. All 3 of those projects that you saw, which is about 40 some miles of arterial road, represent about half of our arterial need for ATMS. And so all of our phase 1 is fiber optic. That's what our plan is currently. And moving forward, I can't imagine, once we get this in, I believe, everyone will agree we need to continue along that path, especially with our, our partnerships with our utility companies. It should become much easier to do. Otherwise, you would, if you did not have those utility agreements, you would need to consider possibly using radio and maybe fiber mixed, sort of a hybrid system, possibly. You mentioned work order tracking. What platform are y'all using to track work orders and maintenance issues?
It's a platform called Acela. We implemented about 4 years ago for our section, and it's slowly being implemented in other sections of the city.
Has that dramatically increased productivity as far as being able to track maintenance and knowing where your field assets are and the status?
Yeah, there's through on one inputs a lot of requests into the system. So any call they receive usually goes through there. You can set up schedule to be finished by a certain date, or you can put in certain, say, you want a preventative maintenance to be done at a certain time. You can put it in there, and the work order will pop up at that time. So it has its benefits, but it can certainly have its issues as well.
Well, Ice, what did y'all use before you had that platform? Was it all emails, and did you have a platform before?
I can't recall what the previous, do you remember what the previous platform was called? It was an online platform as well.
It was called Civic, I believe, and it was basically some staff members or a staff member kind of cobbled it together. It wasn't integrated with any other departments in the city. So it got the job done for us, but we've added a lot more capability. For instance, transferring work orders from one department to another, scheduling work for public service. You know, rather than having to send an email, we can just say we've got a site distance issue here and schedule a work order to have some vegetation cleared by another department.
We also have asset tracking through. So years ago, a couple of years ago, we did a sign inventory. So we have that integrated with the platform, and we have signal cabinets integrated into it. So you can tag a signal cabinet in a work order, and you can look up what's previously been done there or requested there.
Oh, that's great. We've got time for one more question. I see Devin Doyle asked, you touched with the fiber, but he asked about installing, is it all going to be aerial versus underground, or a balance depending on pole space? Are there certain areas where you have to go underground because there's just not space available on poles?
Yeah, so we are definitely going to have some underground, but I would just a generalized percentage would be probably 90% above ground aerial.
Okay.
The exception to that, of course, would be in our downtown districts or along the UT corridor, Cumberland. A lot of those we actually have planned conduits for the fiber communication. So it's just a function of tying into some of our existing systems in those areas.
Have y'all looked at doing a flashing yellow arrow anywhere? Y'all have those yet with the new controllers?
Yeah, we have a couple at a few locations, and we're certainly looking to add more. Jeff was mentioning conduit on Cumberland. We did install conduit for feature fiber along 4 or 5 intersections, but those also we added flashing yellow arrows. So we're certainly looking to expand in certain areas.
I think we have 10 locations.
Okay, cool. Did y'all do any kind of media campaign in advance of that to educate the public? Did that generate a lot of comments or when you first put them out?
No, mainly because the county did one right when we were getting ready to deploy ours, and it was really good. We did talk to them about it, and there was almost no pushback or any kind of negativity. So we actually just brought on one of our new projects. We brought it online, and there was no problems with it. So we've just adopted that as our standard now for moving forward. And we've seen several in the county now come on. It's really not that new to anybody anymore.
That's great to hear. Well, I guess for the sake of time, I don't think we have any other questions. So thank you, Zach, Jeff, and Evan for presenting today. I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you
Luke.
for having us. Mhm.
Let's see, share my screen. With that, we've got a break for about 30 minutes or so. Then we'll have technical session 2. Let's see. Go to the next one.
Luke, it may be beneficial just to mention that if there's a separate Zoom number,
Oh, yeah.
link for the afternoon.
Yeah, sorry about that. I apologize for the technical difficulties we had this morning, but yes, we'll log out of this call and we'll log into the separate Zoom webinar call for this afternoon. And I'll make sure to start that call early and the way y'all can log in. And we'll have separate teams. We'll have a Teams call for the TSITE business meeting and a Zoom call for the DSITE business meeting, so we can both go our separate ways for the business meeting. And we'll send those links out in the chat towards the end of the technical session too. But I think that's all I had to cover. Thank you everyone for joining in today. We'll look forward to seeing you in a little bit shortly after lunch.
You, Luke.